Welcome to the TK Show with the Athletic Bay Area's Editor-in-Chief, Tim Kawakami.
Everybody, Tim Kawakami, TK Show, recording from the magnificent Kawakami Studios once again. For some reason, Ben Cruz just loves recording here every time. Let's just record at your house. So that's what we do, and very, very pleased to have on as my guest my new colleague, my longtime friend, but new colleague, national media critic, longtime Sports Illustrated, and now at The Athletic. The very Athletic. That's where I work. Richard, you work at the same company as me. Great to have on. Richard Deitsch, media critic, writer about many different things, Olympics, all sorts of things. But Richard, welcome to the company. Welcome to the TK Show. How are you doing today?
It's quite an intro, Tim.
I know.
Thank you very much.
Went a little too long there, I think, but go ahead.
Well, in all seriousness, thank you. And I will say publicly that you were really, really instrumental in terms of answering a ton of questions I had about The Athletic prior to joining it, and were one of the reasons that made me feel like this would be a great place to work. So on a personal note, I appreciate that. Very excited, obviously.
Richard, I'll just ask you, it can't be easy to leave Sports Illustrated. What was the thought process, or how long decision-making situation was this for you to come from Sports Illustrated to The Athletic?
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, it was a pretty excruciating decision, to be blunt. Sports Illustrated had been my employer essentially my entire professional working life, or at least most of it. And I have immense loyalty and love for the place. And so it was not an easy decision by any means. The one thing I did was I let my bosses know at Sports Illustrated almost immediately that The Athletic had talked to me and made an offer. And so everything was transparent with those guys in terms of just, they were really, really good. And they offered me a really, beyond what I thought package to stay. And they were very, very good just about hearing me out and my thought process out. And in the end, Tim, it had nothing to do with my day-to-day job at Sports Illustrated. It certainly had nothing to do with my colleagues, who I have immense respect for. The two things that were the reason I made the decision: one, I believe in The Athletic, and I believe in its model. They had hired some exceptionally talented people like yourself, and so I knew they were serious about producing quality sports journalism. But, and I'll be totally honest with your audience, the thing that Sports Illustrated couldn't give me is they could not give me any kind of guarantee on what is going to happen to the company, because the people who I work for can't control it. The Time Inc., which was the parent company of Sports Illustrated for 60, 70 years or whatever it was sold to Meredith, big corporation in Des Moines, a couple months ago. And so they bought Time and People and Fortune and Sports Illustrated and Style, all those magazines that are out of New York. And Meredith has no long-term, how do I sort of say it? They have no experience with the kind of things that Sports Illustrated and Time do, weekly magazines. Their business is service-oriented magazines and women's magazines. And so it was very clear, at least to me before they made it public, that they were going to sell Sports Illustrated. And that was the thing that my bosses couldn't give me. They couldn't guarantee where it was going to be sold or what was going to happen to the company, what was going to happen specifically to SI. And so that was a big factor in my decision, was that I wanted to at least take a little bit of personal control of my own journey, as opposed to hoping and sticking around for a roll of the dice that Sports Illustrated would get a great steward. I'm certainly rooting for that, but that, Tim, in the end, was really the biggest decision for me. It was just that I wanted to take a little bit of control over where I was going to head next.
We don't need this to be a minute analysis of what's going on at Sports Illustrated, but had you felt any changes? I mean, obviously they're dropping the amount of print publications that they do. I mean, has there been a different Sports Illustrated over the last few months, even the last years?
Yeah, it's different. In my day-to-day, not so much, because I had really a lot of autonomy and was given a lot of creative freedom to cover media, to cover women's basketball. And so my day-to-day was, fairly close to, let's say, what it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. But everything surrounding me, and obviously I was a part of it, so I felt it as well, was changing. Magazines' frequency dropped from essentially, 50, 52, 48 issues a year, essentially a weekly magazine, to under 30.
Yep.
Significant change. Even if those individual magazines are bigger, it's no longer what it was. It's no longer weekly. I've been through so many rounds of layoffs, and you know this from the newspaper world.
Sure.
Was very fortunate, obviously, not to be laid off, but I in the last, it felt like 5 or 6 years, I went through like 9 rounds of layoffs. So I saw these were not people who were not carrying their weight. These were long-time, really smart people who helped make a magazine or brand or a website great. And unless you didn't have your eyes open, you could see that, the place was just losing. It's still a great place, but it was losing what really made it sort of stand out in the marketplace. And so, nothing necessarily like, don't travel or don't do this story or don't do this, but like you had, I'm sure, in newspapers, there was more of an emphasis on the metrics on the website in terms of what was getting traffic, what wasn't. At a certain point there, I was given traffic goals for media stories. Now, again, if I didn't hit them, nothing was going to happen. And if I did hit them, it's not like I was getting an extra bonus. But that tells you something. That tells you that metrics are really, really important. So things were definitely changing over my last couple of years. And then lastly, we just, if you look at Sports Illustrated in like mid-90s, early 2000s, just look at the list of writers and reporters on the masthead and then compare it to what it is in 2018. It's just significantly less. And, when you lose immensely talented people, even if you still have immensely talented people there, it's always going to impact the product.
Yep. One thing that I've noticed, and I might have talked to you about this when we were discussing this, was when I made the decision to leave the Mercury News to come to the Athletic, maybe people in the business weren't so sure, but the teams and my sources got it maybe more than anything. They understood kind of going to a new platform. I'm just curious, you cover networks and you cover, other entities like that. What's been the response from your sources at ESPN or NBC or even some of the leagues? Has there been an acceptance of it, or what's the sense that way?
It's a really good question. I think things have changed immeasurably in the last year, where had I asked them about the Athletic a year ago, their answers would have been different. But they've seen all the writers from places around the country who have gone there. And at least in my world, in media, people in the business, whether it's PR people, sports executives, agents, they read as much as we do. Yep. So they're aware of the writers and the beat reporters around the country. And when they start seeing these reporters heading to this digital enterprise, they take note of it. So one of the things that I was worried about, and I'm not going to lie, it's still sort of part of, well, maybe not call it a worry, but a little bit of a concern is, are people going to still talk to me or reach out to me in the same way they did when I was at Sports Illustrated, because it's obviously a very famous and well-known place and millions of subscribers, circulation. And so that was a real issue for me. But I have found so far that there has really been not a change outside of the fact that there are still people who are not going to go behind a paywall to get their content, and that's for all of us going to be a battle to change that behavior and to change that opinion and to let people know that what they're paying for is the highest kind of quality that they can get in sports. So far it hasn't been that bad in terms of the reaction. I will tell you this. I think you'll just find this interesting because of where we both work now. When I talked to, I asked a couple people in the business as I was making this decision. I wanted to just get their sense of where they thought the Athletic was going and where they thought the Sports Illustrated was going in the future and what they thought would be a bigger bet. I didn't tell them I was considering either. We're just sort of, shooting the S, as they say, about both places. And some very, very smart and very, very high-level people in the business were really bullish on the Athletic, their business model, their funding. And that was very helpful to me because I knew the people I talked to at the Athletic were going to sing the Athletic's praises. I knew my longtime colleagues at SI were going to tell me why SI was great and why SI's future was great. But it was important for me to just get independent people who had no connection or no dogs in the fight. And they were very, very high on where the Athletic was heading, particularly in funding and particularly in the idea of changing the paradigm of how people consume content.
Yep.
And so that was really helpful. And so if I now think about it, now that I'm at this place, that might have been a little bit of a tell in terms of people within the business, people within our industry have been pretty quick to accept that the Athletic is a publication that should get credentialed, that you should be talking to if you want to reach consumers, and you should treat in the same way you would treat your major daily paper in your metro section, or your metro city.
Yep, and you and I, obviously, I covered sports media myself for a little bit. I really do believe this is a beat. This is an issue that has to be covered if you're going to cover sports seriously. And I've had my own guy in the Bay Area assigned since we launched, and that's a huge one of the many reasons I'm happy you're here, just to cover ESPN, to cover CBS's coverage of the Masters, to cover the NFL the way networks cover them. I think is such an integral part of it. I don't even think it's a question that it has to be covered, and I think if we can deliver it through you, and obviously you're the best at it, it only gives people more reason to subscribe, to read, and it just becomes an automatic to me. And I think that's some of the things I might have said to you when we were talking, when you were considering this. I just don't think it's even a question that people will pay for this. I don't think there's even a question. I appreciate that. I'm not sure I'm the best, but I certainly work hard and I'll do my best. But the thing that's very clear, and this is where honestly the blogosphere has been a huge help, the Deitschs of the world, awful announcings, etc., is that when traditional newspapers started dropping what was back then the sports TV column, and I know you know all about this world, there was a void that the traditional newspapers in so many places no longer wrote about either their local television coverage. Now, again, I'm talking sort of pre-web or the early web here, where television was king and you'd write about them, or nationally. And the Deitschs of the world, either intentionally or unintentionally, realized there was a void on that and started covering ESPN the way you would cover a baseball team in your city. And what they were rewarded with massive traffic. Yep. Now, obviously, they were going to cover stuff that your traditional sports television writer wasn't going to cover. They were going to go into places that a lot of newspapers would not go. But the larger point was that there was a clear interest in this kind of content. Flash forward, and they were very helpful because I was pretty early in transitioning to SI.com, to getting really long Peter King-style columns on the media on SI.com. And so now as you flash forward to where we are today, I would argue, and I don't even think it's an argument, that your average sports fan can identify somebody like Joe Buck or Troy Aikman more than they could identify the second starter of most of the major league teams that exist. These are people basically in your homes every day. These are people who bring you the games that you love and enjoy, and obviously on a local level, your local people. Same thing when it comes to the Adrian Wojnarowskis of the world or the Adam Schefters. Those are people who basically influence you on a day-to-day basis when it comes to your web consumption. And so it just always seemed logical to me, and I think, thank God, it's sort of been proven today in the metrics, that there's just a great, huge demand for this because this is how games are brought to us. They're brought to us by the ESPNs and the Foxes, and words are brought to us by the Sports Illustrated and the Athletics. And so, if nothing else, I really appreciate the Athletic starting this position because I do think beyond me and obviously beyond me getting a cool job, it just signals to the marketplace that, like, you really should have this position if you are a sports outlet because there's a massive amount of interest in it. And like you, Tim, I know we've always sort of were beating our heads. There are major papers in this country that just decided to abandon the position. The LA Times, perfect example. They had a guy, Larry Stewart, whether you liked him or not, he was basically, he kind of owned Southern California's sports media consumption in a major paper, and people were clearly interested in it. USA Today, when they had Rudy Martzke, had sort of a monopoly on this beat and probably sold a lot of papers because he was writing about stuff you saw on TV. And then just weirdly enough, and maybe this is just a product of newspapers
being in financial trouble, they just sort of they put their arms up and they never try to fill these positions. And I've always thought it was a mistake, because I think it's very clear sports media is a billion-dollar business and people are very interested in it.
Well, that's how, by the way, the leagues are run. By the way, you want to know why the schedules are the way they are? You want to know why games are at 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. on the West Coast? It's because the networks decided, because they're the ones paying for it. That's the part I've learned so much about leagues covering the television aspect of it. And I had already been a beat writer, but just why things are decided the way they are, why the Masters is set up the way the Masters is, it's because television is paying 80% of this. So
correct.
It just, that view into the sports world has been incredibly valuable for me. Maybe it irritates the networks and teams a little bit sometimes when we write too much about it, but I think it's just impossible to deny how important it is. I want to ask you now. You're working for Toronto radio, 3 times a week? How is this all working?
Well, it'll be 30 weeks a year. Okay. So when I'm on, it'll be for the full week. But the family and I are moving to Toronto, which is an amazing city.
Wow.
And a place I'm still going to be a citizen, Jim. Don't worry, I'm not getting my citizenship.
We got a lot of Toronto media stuff then. No, I'm kidding.
No Toronto media. Trust me. I've made it very clear to my Toronto employees I'm not writing about Toronto media. It'd be a pretty big conflict. So yeah, I mean, listen, it's a station I've been a guest on for many, many years called 590 Sportsnet. It's probably the biggest station in Canada in terms of sports. They have the Blue Jays and their shows go across the country. And so really, I mean, I had done a week or two up there, just sort of come up for a week, be like a guest host. It went really, really well a couple of years ago. They really liked me, met a lot of great people. Didn't necessarily think anything would come of it more than that. And then we reconnected in December on, and I thought they were basically just going to invite me up for another week sometime in 2018. And instead, they made an offer. They said, we're going to have some changes. And is this something you might be interested in full time, moving your family up here? And had a long negotiation. I was sort of talking to the Athletic as well. And eventually my wife and I just decided, it's worth taking the adventure. It's an amazing city. It's a great country. And we're never going to probably get an opportunity like this again. And so I'm heading up there. I'll be on the air starting in June. I won't be on the air 52 weeks a year, but a pretty sizable chunk. And the weeks that I'm on, I'll be on Monday through Friday, 5 to 7, on a show called Primetime Sports with Bob McCowan. And Bob McCowan is not really a U.S. equivalent, but he's the most famous sports talk host in Canada and has sort of set the standard for sports talk in that country for 3 decades. So I'm really honestly walking into like a dream spot in that I walk into the most established sports talk show in the country with a guy who's known nationally. The other co-host is a guy named Stephen Brunt, a very famous award-winning writer up there. He'll be the co-host on the weeks that I'm not there. So, it really was like it was a no-brainer to take it. I'm being set up to succeed, and I'm heading to a city that's one of the great world cities. So we decided to do it. It's a little bit crazy, but maybe it's genius too, and we'll see how it goes.
We're going to take a quick break for a word from our friends at Hims, a new wellness brand for men. Is that hairline slowly starting to move backwards? I know some of you Warriors fans have used that line when talking about a certain Eastern Conference rival, but it's not funny when it starts happening to you. 66% of men lose their hair by age 35. Thing is, when you start to notice hair loss, it's too late. It's easier to keep the hair you have than to replace the hair you've lost. Do you want your hairline to recede, or do you want to do something about it? Luckily, we've got a solution for you. forhims.com, a one-stop shop for hair loss and more for men. Thanks to science, baldness can be optional. Hims connects you with real doctors and medical-grade solutions to treat hair loss. No weird snake oil pills or gas station counter supplements. These prescription solutions are backed by science. Save hours by going to forhims.com. It's so easy. Answer a few quick questions, a doctor will review and prescribe you products, and they are shipped directly to your door. Now is your chance to order. TK's listeners get a trial month of Hims for just $5 while supplies last. See website for full details. This would cost hundreds of dollars if you went to the doctor or a pharmacy. So go to forhims.com/TK. That's forhims.com/TK. forhims.com/TK. Now, back to the TK show.
I respect that. I just respect it. Both say, hey, this could be fun, and this could stretch you in a lot of interesting ways, and I like that. Are you going to start talking hockey? I mean, is that what you do?
Tim, I've already started. I mean, I can give you the entire. I could basically give you the entire Maple Leaf line combination. You want to talk Austin Matthews, Willie Nylander, Mitch Marner? I can Freddie Anderson. I can do it now. Can't do it as well as a lot of the Canadian hosts, but the one thing that's interesting, you'll find this just because you're such a basketball guy like myself, is I think what really helped me is I've always been a big NBA fan and a big NBA watcher, and the market is still very heavy Maple Leaf. So there's so many people who are NHL experts beyond experts.
Yep.
But I did fit in pretty good because I could talk NBA, and I had followed the Raptors for a while, and now the Raptors have just, as you know, have had this incredible year. They've really captured the city's attention. And so it's not a bad place for an American to come in who knows the NBA because the Raptors have been so great this year.
That's tremendous. That was the question. You're living in Toronto. That is really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a great city. If you've for anybody who's listening who hasn't been there, it's a great place to visit.
I just want to ask you a little bit about ESPN. You've covered it so well, so much. I'm sure you will continue to do it. The changes they're going through, they seem to kind of contort every 6 months or year or so. Where do you see this like right now? What kind of presentation are they getting to? Is Sports Center like devalued, valued again, personality driven, not personality driven? Are they going back to kind of the old ESPN Sports Center, or are they still not sure yet?
Well, if you want to take Sports Center sort of a micro look at the company, obviously they just have a new president who's come in, so that president has a lot of challenges. I mean, ESPN gets bashed. There's a lot of times they are right to be bashed. A lot of times it's opportunists bashing them. But they have really objectively had one of the more insane 12 months we've ever seen a company like that have, topping off with the fact that their president eventually admitted to resigning for being extorted while doing cocaine. That story, by the way, isn't even continued. I think we will still find out more from that. But just think about how insane that is if you just sort of step back for a second. So they have to figure out a lot of things. The biggest thing they have to figure out, of course, is what is their streaming service going to be? Their over-the-top streaming service, which eventually they're eventually going to have to charge people for, and what are the properties that are going to be on there? ESPN obviously owns a lot of high-end stuff in college sports and college basketball, college football, et cetera. And so they have to figure out how they're going to populate their streaming service without obviously killing the golden goose, which is still cable, even with people cord cutting and even with young people not paying for cable as they used to. So they have to really navigate this world of creating the streaming service, trying to make money on that streaming service while getting every last drop of the cable business still, because the cable business is what makes them, their billions, and in the fact that they still have the most, you're still paying the most for ESPN as an individual subscriber for their cable channel than any other channel. As you then head on, Tim, sort of down the line in terms of, well, what does all this mean? New president, what's their direction? SportsCenter is a real challenge for them because in 2018, what is SportsCenter at this time? It's not anything like it was when we were younger or even in the 2000s, because the world of smartphones and the world of the web, laptops, iPads, etc., you are able to get scores and highlights in real time. So what SportsCenter was sort of built on really no longer exists. So at a certain point, and this is not too long ago, they decided, okay, well, if highlights and scores aren't going to drive you here, let's make it personality-based. They changed that with Scott Van Pelt, changed that with Jamel Hill and Michael Smith. The Jamel Hill and Michael Smith thing we could probably do 5 hours on. They eventually, bailed, in my opinion, really didn't support them and then bailed out when things got a little tight. And so now I think they are going to try to go back to what is more of a traditional sports center. But the reality is there's nothing they can do that's going to stop the bleeding and the ratings decline in most of the sports center spots, including the 6 p.m. sports center including the 11 well, not 11 p.m. I'm actually may be able to hold a little bit. The 6 p.m. Sports Center, any Sports Center that exists between 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, those numbers are just going to continue to go down because what Sports Center provides is essentially what you can already get on your own devices. So I think whatever that brand ultimately becomes, it's, it'll become on like their Snapchat platform, on some of their social media platforms. It'll still exist on TV, but we'll see, I think, less and less Sports Centers heading forward. The interesting thing then is if Sports Center's not taking all your airtime on these many, many channels and many, many time blocks, what is going to take that? And that's where you get their new morning show with Mike Greenberg, Michelle Beadle, Jalen Rose. And the question is, can they still create these shows which can be destination viewing in some very tough time slots? So ESPN has a lot of challenges. They got to continue to stay relevant against all their competition. They got to create a great streaming service against all this other competition. And then lastly, they got to figure out what they're going to do with live games. And are they going to be committed as John Skipper was? And are they going to continue to pony up for things like the NFL when those contracts come up?
Is FS1 a real threat? Are they emerging as a real threat, or is it just has that kind of flattened out a little bit?
Yeah, I think anybody's a competitor just because, they exist at the same time and they do the same thing. And Fox obviously has a ton of money, enough money to the point where they can actually outspend their mistakes, which Fox sort of has done. And so they're a competitor, but as of now, in the sort of the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. block, they're not close to ESPN in terms of viewership or the amount of money that you have to pay for FS1 versus what you have to pay for ESPN. So they're not a 1v1 competitor at this point, but I think they're a competitor in the sense that at different times with different properties, I think Fox can do well and ESPN has to be concerned about them. The interesting thing for Fox heading forward is that Big Fox seems to have decided they're not doing scripted programming anymore, which may mean more sports on Big Fox, which is kind of interesting. And we're going to see more, I think, live sports on FS1, which I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they drop some of this debate-style programming and try to fill in those windows with some more live sports. I think if I was Fox, too, I would really think about what I'm going to do in terms of streaming, because you don't want to let the ESPNs and the Turner/Bleacher Reports get too far ahead in that world, because, there's a very real chance, 20, 25 years from now, more people are getting their sports stuff online versus through their cable box.
Or on their phones, or however
exactly.
This is absolutely going.
Yep.
Richard, I know I've asked you this question before, so I got a couple for you at the end, but I'm still curious. Richard Deitsch, what's your favorite restaurant?
My favorite, you always ask me this.
Yeah.
Now I need a Toronto one. I don't have one yet.
I'd love a Toronto one.
Well, I was going to say my favorite. I'm going to give my favorite restaurant, which is not any kind of fancy restaurant, but I like to just give this tip because if people are going to listen to your podcast, they travel to New York. This is a very easy and inexpensive thing to do. The best slice of New York pizza, in my opinion, is at Sal and Carmine's, which is on West 102nd Street and Broadway. It is you can sit down at the place, but this is not fancy dining at all. They've been there since like the 50s. The people who started were these two old Italian guys, very, very crabby but lovable, and would basically be very grumpy when you went up to buy your pizza. But they have just figured out how to make the greatest slice ever. I don't know if it's the ovens, I don't know if it's the water or the dough that they have, and now the nephews are running the business. But it is the best, in my opinion, singular slice in New York City. You could look it up, Google it. It'll have great ratings. It's called Sal and Carmine. Very easy to get in. No lines. I think the slice is either $3 or $4, but if you happen to be very high on the west side of Manhattan, trust me on this. Just head over there, West on 102nd and Broadway, buy a couple slices. That is quintessential A++ New York pizza.
And probably on the top three things of what Richard Deitsch is going to miss when he moves to Toronto. I will,
yeah, because I'm not. Yeah, and I know Toronto has pizza, but
Not like
it is probably not the specialty of the city.
We're going to do this. We're going to get you some Toronto restaurant recommendations. That I'm going to guarantee. We're going to get.
Well, I know between. I will say this: no BS here. The Toronto Athletic site is unbelievable.
Yes,
between Myrtle,
yes.
Andrew Stoughton, John Lott, they have like some phenomenal writers and reporters working there. They have educated me in terms of getting my knowledge of Toronto sports way high, and it's good, and it's absolutely already made me a better person on 590, and it's going to make me a better person when I get there in June. They do a lot of really. I should mention Eric Corrine as well for the Raptors.
Absolutely.
They just do a lot of really smart stuff, and I really appreciate that. They're really smart people.
What better to get yourself prepared for doing talk radio than reading The Athletic Toronto? I love it. Also, okay,
yep.
I'll ask you on one other because I was so good on that last one. What's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is Witness with
good.
Harrison Ford and Kelly McGill. It's a little old school there.
Yeah, way back.
Yeah, way back. I forgot how old I was when I saw it, but I was very young, and I saw that movie and was like sort of fascinated by the Amish afterwards. Like I begged my mom to take me to Amish country. She never did. But for whatever it was, whether it was just sort of like this forbidden love, whether it was a hard-nosed Philly detective in Amish country trying to protect the kid, young Danny Glover, by the way, is a villain. I don't know what it was about that film, but I loved that film. I've seen it probably 100 times. It's certainly not the best film ever made. I wouldn't say it's close to the best film, but great 3.5 kind of star film if you've never seen it to just check out. But yeah, when anyone ever asks me that, it's always Witness.
That's a good one. And isn't the little kid the guy who ended up playing Frodo in Lord of the Rings? Am I correct?
Lucas Haas.
Yes. No, it's not. That's not the same thing.
No,
yeah.
Sean Astin, I think, is Frodo, right? But Lucas Haas eventually went on to be an actor. He must be in his 30s now. That little kid.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean,
it's a great pick. It's a great pick. I remember watching that movie, and it's like. It's Harrison Ford in a different kind of Harrison Ford, but it's still him. It's a good kind of offshoot of his other characters. Tremendous stuff, Richard. Always great talking to you. And I know what I said to you when we were talking before is I just think you're going to be great at The Athletic, and I know it. It's already been true, and just so happy to have you. And I didn't want to push you towards this. I wanted it to be your decision, and I'm sure it was. But I could not be happier that you made a decision to come here. I couldn't be happier that you're at The Athletic. It makes me feel better about the company, too, and I've already felt great about it. So thank you for that.
That's very nice of you to say. And in all seriousness, I think we probably talked 3 different times, 60 minutes in total, and you were major help in my thinking. So your audience should know that. It was really important to me to talk to some people there who could deal me straight, and you did. So I appreciate that, and I'm very happy to be here, and I will, you'll definitely see me writing always a big mega column on Monday, and then and other different things during the week.
All right, everybody, the new athletic media writer, all sorts of things. You'll be writing other stuff, I'm sure, too. But
I hope tell the bosses I would like to write women's basketball.
Yes, why not? And Toronto media star, Richard Deitsch, everybody. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Richard.
Thanks, Tim.
That's the show for today, everybody. Thank you.